Hey, everybody, welcome to the show. Thanks for listening. We're so grateful that each week you tune in to the Simplify Church podcast and hang out with us. We just believe in trying to equip everyday pastors, everyday leaders such as yourself, who are just, man, in the trenches doing the nitty gritty of everyday ministry that maybe you don't have a large network, maybe you don't have the resources that other churches have. And those things are great, but sometimes we just don't have those. And for a lot of us, we're flying solo, we're flying blind. We're just trying to figure out the nuances of ministry while juggling the complexities of. Some of you are bivocational. Some of you have just so much on your plate. And so this podcast just hopefully exists as a bright spot in your week and as a resource to equip you to do the work that the Lord's called you to do. And I'm pumped for today because not only do we have, just the anchor of the program. I mean, the guy is, he's the George Washington of the Simplify podcast, one of the founding fathers here. We've got my man Greg in the studio. And so thankful to have you, brother. You've toned it down today. You got more of a this old house sort of situation going on.
Yeah, man. Lots of projects going on. So I had to channel my inner Norm. And I'm really trying to up my flannel graph game, man.
Yeah,
so
well, that's delightful. Very muted tones.
I've got one side of it, at least the flannel part. I don't have the graph done yet, but
okay.
I'm working on it because I'm taking up the challenge, man. Easter, bring back the flannel graph.
I'm telling you,
I'm doing it.
I've heard so many references to it as of late. Church on Sunday, actually, the pastor mentioned flannel graph briefly, and I was like, "Wow, okay, I love those. I love those little callbacks, man. It's so great." But I think for a Halloween costume, you could take that and you could just, kind of like Jim from The Office, you could print out some small charts and graphs, and just pin them to your shirt and see if anybody guesses what you are.
Go as flannel graph.
Hey,
I thought you were gonna like throw in the reference of like being Al Borland from Home Improvement or something like that. But I'll take the flannel graph.
Well, okay. Thanks, Tim. So, are you?
I don't think so, Tim.
I don't think so, Tim. Is your shirt tucked in or are you untucked right now?
I don't ever tuck a shirt in, man.
Okay. Well, I wasn't sure, but I appreciate
unless I'm rocking a vest.
Okay.
But clearly, I'm not rocking a vest because Mike hasn't sent me a vest.
I've been shopping. I've gone to 2 stores and I've been shopping. And one I found was for a small child. And I didn't think that was going to get the job done.
Schmedium.
Yeah, schmedium. And so, man, Greg's in the studio looking good, feeling good, sounding good. And also in the studio today is a longtime friend, one of the most intelligent, articulate, and all-around handsome fellas I've ever known. My guy Robby Ballmeyer is in the studio with us. What's up, Robbie B?
Hey, I thought you were going to introduce somebody else, so I was waiting.
Yeah,
who else is coming on today?
Yeah, no, there's another guest on today. Cool.
I see 3 screens. Is there a 4th screen? Is this a mystery guest? How are you, man? How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys. It's great to be here. So
yeah. Thankful to have you on, dude. You're the kind of guy that is really the target, the epitome of the type of pastor that we are hoping to equip and reach and build community with, because you're living out the very complexities that many pastors, hundreds, if not thousands of pastors across the country, across North America are dealing with every single day. And so for those of you that don't know, Robbie, give you a little bit of background about him. Guy's been in ministry for a number of years. I think he just celebrated his 62nd birthday. And so the lighting is very generous to him in his studio. Yeah. But no, he's been in ministry for a long time. We both were at seminary together, and we did ministry close to proximity with each other. I think we did 1 or 2 maybe combined mission trips together. We did events together. Years ago.
A lot of trouble together.
We got into a lot of trouble together back in the youth ministry days. But since then, man, Robbie's been on kind of a wild ride. And so, man, why don't you, instead of me just kind of telling your story, why don't you give us just some kind of flyover highlights? So we'll start back in the days of Sardinia, Ohio.
Oh yeah.
You're student pastor at a church there. And so where do you were there for how long did you serve with that congregation?
I was there 4 or 5 years. It's a longer story, but really my wife and I felt called out to California. I can't really explain it. I don't even necessarily love the called language. We just felt this drive to go and do ministry out in California. And through a series of events, we had taken a mission trip out there with some of our kids, and I ended up getting offered a job with the Orange County Rescue Mission. So after about 4 years of building a student ministry kind of from the ground up, we took on a recovery facility out in the middle of nowhere, Southern California, that was 28 beds for men coming out of addiction on a horse ranch. So we had a dozen or 24 horses, like 250 head of goat, dogs to shepherd them. And we had guys coming and radically transform their lives. So I've been doing ministry now in some capacity for almost 2 decades. And that was probably one of the most challenging times of my life. And I was 28 when I took that job. And I was just telling you earlier, Mike, like my boss literally like drove us out there, and my wife, our small like 4-year-old child, and said, well, see you in a couple months, gave me a hug and got in her car and left. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I don't know what I'm doing. And so I have, been underqualified and overwhelmed for most of my 20 years. And
man, that statement right there is the statement of ministry. You know, like we are all underqualified and just overwhelmed.
Yeah, exactly. So during that time, I started, I have a BA in biblical studies, and these guys started asking me questions. I'm like, I've never even thought of that question. They were looking at the Bible at such a fresh way. And through kind of turn of events, I was able to go to Biola University to Talbot School of Theology and get my master's in Bible exposition, which was a 10-year dream. And I have no idea how that even really actually happened, and loved every minute of it. And that continued to radically transform my thoughts about the Bible, about Jesus, and how he just makes sense for your life. And I think that's one of the guys at the ranch. He was raised a Buddhist and was coming out of that. And he stopped me after teaching on John, and it said that. He said, I never realized how much Jesus just made sense for my life.
Wow.
And that has just been kind of my driving force in ministry, of realizing how much Jesus makes sense. And if I can help other people see that he makes sense, then man, that's a win. So
man, you talk about putting wind in your sails as a pastor.
Yeah, absolutely.
My gosh.
Yeah, there's enough stuff that takes it out of it, and we tend to focus on that stuff.
Yes.
So we did that for 4 or 5 years. Was involved with a church plant that kind of we had some struggle and some strife there, theological differences, and parted ways. Got connected with another church called North Coast Church. Larry Osborne, some of our listeners might be familiar with them. The big, multi-site, multi-campus video venue type thing, and had applied for a job with them, got turned down, but ended up just becoming friends with their leadership team. And fast forward, we moved back to Ohio, kind of rural Ohio where we are. I was invited to be a part of a men's group. I was doing student ministry again in a large church in a small town. And that men's group was a hot mess. They were all like screaming and yelling at each other, like my first meeting. And I was like, what did I walk into? But here I'm coming out of addiction ministry where guys are hot messes. And that's like my heart. And I'm like, can we fix it? Yes, we can. I got some like Bob the Builder problems. and
Greg's like, wait, what now? Oh,
yeah, right. Yeah. Sorry, the flannel. Yeah.
All right.
So I said, guys, let's just, let's watch the teaching from my church out in California. There's small group questions around it. Let's do that. And started doing that. And it just took off. And, fast forward even further, a group of those guys said, man, we really feel like God's calling us to start a church. And they asked me to come be the leader of that. And I said, no way do I want to do that. They had recently left another church. I'm like, I don't want to be a part of pastoring a bunch of disgruntled people.
Right.
That's not what I want to do. And it's about another year, 6 months to a year passed by. North Coast actually came and got involved with them, trying to give them direction. I'm like, man, if North Coast is going to be a part of this, I guess I want to. And they're like, hey, we know you. You're like, what are you doing out here, kind of thing. And so immediately we just kind of became this weird, they didn't know what to do with this microsite of 12 guys that turned into families that pre-COVID hit 100 people. And we were doing live worship and video teaching. We got kicked out of our first like venue that we had. It was a music studio. We got like basically a cease and desist from the Masons who owned it. They're like, "Oh, you're being too loud on a Sunday morning. There's nobody else here." Like, okay. And went literally across the street to a 100-year-old event center in this town, and started renting that, and it just grew. And then we closed our door for 2 weeks, and it was the longest 2 weeks that any of us have ever experienced. And I was like, man, I think this thing's dead. And you couldn't. I mean, we all know, like, we went through it's trauma, right? Like, you couldn't make a right decision, and you couldn't. And so we lost some people over that. It was very difficult.
Yeah.
And we started again with 20 people in 2021. Easter kicked off again. Found a new building that literally, if you stand on our steps, you can see all our other places we've met in. It's, it's just like God's providence there. And so, and North Coast has just doubled down and been amazing. And I feel like I've kind of hit the lottery. And so, like, somebody's going to listen and be like, "Oh, I wish I had that." Like, I don't know why this has worked. It just has. And we have, we've grown. We're probably about 80 people, and then I'm bivocational, and so I work for North Coast and do that almost every night or so, and Sundays, and then I work for Chick-fil-A as my day job, and I held a lot of different hats in the last 5 years for them, but I have a great boss who helps me. So I've seen a lot, and it's really kind of formed me in some very specific ways, but I think my call as a pastor, again, is just to help people see that Jesus makes sense for their life.
Man, that's incredible. You talked about going to this men's group and it just being sheer chaos. And I think every pastor listening can relate, because they're like, "Oh, we just call that a deacons meeting." Like that's.
I've sat in those meetings too. Yeah.
We've all been a part of those.
Yeah, the guy talking, you're like, did he really just say that? Like, the reason they don't have to go visit the sick people in the church is because we pay somebody to do that. I'm like, do you know what a deacon is? I'm like, it's the very definition of your role, man.
Yeah,
like,
maybe take times between your smoke breaks between Sunday school and a regular service and get out there and shake some hands, buddy. Oh my gosh, man. I totally get that. So Greg, I think you can see why I'm a big fan of Robby and why he's been such a blessing in my life. And I just think he has so much to say for pastors who are, believing that maybe things should be different for them, or that why isn't this easier? Why isn't this happening in a way that we want? And I think sometimes the journey it's just not at all what we think it should be. And that probably makes for a better journey. That makes for a better journey, I think, anyway.
I agree. And I think that's the beauty of walking with Jesus. And it's the same beauty that we see when we take a step back and we look at the scriptures.
Yep.
Like, I don't know that anybody in the scriptures, their life played out like they thought it would. But the story that they tell. And I think that if we're honest, for many of us, when we take that step back and we say, "Okay, God, you're doing your thing, and I just want to be part of it," we're able to look back and see those same things going places and doing things that we could have never dreamed of. And so, I'm excited to hear some more of your story, Robby. I'm excited to hear you share with us some of the things that you've learned along the way. And excited about what we're talking about as we're going to dive into when do I need to be a pastor and when do I need to be pastored?
Yeah.
And I think that's a hard thing to balance because we feel like we're always on. We're always, somebody's always expecting something from us. And so begin to walk us through this thought process and how do we begin to identify those moments of when to be pastor and when to be pastored, and maybe what's that look like?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question on there. And as Mike and I were kind of talking about a topic of what that would be, I threw that out to him, and then he comes back. He's like, "Hey, let's talk about that." I'm like, yeah, that's a really complex topic, right? And
it is.
And I think he even add to that. Let's add another question: how do I pastor when I need to be pastored? Right? And when because like you said, Greg, like we always feel on, right? I feel like, man, can I take a picture and post this to my social media without somebody in my church being critical
Right.
of what it is? Like, and
yeah.
and it's the most innocuous thing sometimes, right? We know, like, oh, I'm not going to post my doing that or doing this, but it's like, oh, you ate there. I can't believe you'd even go to that restaurant,
Right.
you know? And you're like, whoa, why are we canceling this restaurant now? I didn't realize that, you know, we had a problem with that, you know, and you can't stay up because you always feel like you're on blast and you're in the spotlight constantly. So I think there's an idea of, Mike, what do I always tell you? Like, I can't pastor the internet.
Right.
It's not my job to pastor the internet. It's my job to pastor people that either one have identified as my sheep, right? They're in my church, they're coming, even if they haven't taken your membership class, like they're there, right? But two is people that I've identified in the community that I want to reach out to and do. So like the idea of reaching out to people constantly, I think is going to happen. And obviously we all know, I don't have to tell you guys like, oh, we're going to be on our guard on that. But there are some things that we want to be on guard when we want to pastor and when to be pastored. I would say three things to guard ourselves against in this, if I can give you that real quick, and then we can roll out this. As we think about this, there's three things that I would identify that I try to guard my heart against when I'm trying to, you know, when I'm pastor and when I need to be pastored. Is one is sin, obviously, and is that I want to avoid those things that are going to separate me from others and separate me from God.
Mm-hmm.
The other is cynicism. It's so hard, or excuse me, so easy to fall into being cynical about our programs, about our processes, and about our people. And we can say, oh, that doesn't work. Oh, so-and-so won't like that. Oh, so, you know, and I'm guilty of this a lot, that I allow what other people think about what God has called me to do affect how I do it. And then I become cynical and I go, that's not going to work. That's not, you know, and so I throw my hands up. And then if I give into sin and I give into cynicism, the last thing that I have to guard myself against, because these will lead to it, is isolation. So sin, cynicism, and isolation. And I will isolate. And I know, we've talked before about, being lonely and about that loneliness that comes as being a pastor, but some of it is self-induced because of our sin and our cynicism.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. You talked about feeling like you have to be so overly concerned with what other people are thinking and whether or not it's going to be effective, whether or not it's going to be successful. And that plays into your decision making. And I feel like that statement right there, if as not just as pastors, but if everyone who's listening is able to stop and just reflect on that, there has to be just a small percentage of people who are going, yeah, I don't really wrestle with that. I would say the vast majority of people that are serving in ministry in any capacity, whether it's a volunteer or as a staff member, as a pastor, this is something that is so detrimental to leadership because there's so much worry about pleasing others, getting the approval of others, and what we're doing to be accepted, and ultimately to be championed, to be, and so do you think that maybe, and this might be just good roundtable talk, but that concern of cynicism to the point that we want to avoid what other people think. And so we don't want to become cynical because of that, but does that come from a place of hubris? Like, what drives that, do you think? Where does that come from?
That's a good question. I think, I don't know. I just wonder if it's our own shortcomings, right? And like I said before, I felt so many times in my ministry, like I'm underqualified and overwhelmed. And so the reality is, like, we have such a big mission. And if we are allowing ourselves to be formed, we're all being formed by something, that spiritual process of sanctification, right? That if we're allowing ourselves to be formed by our social media and our TikTok feed more than anything, like, I can feel like the world is against me. And then I'm going to carry that into my church, but realize like your people are being formed by that. And so how are you bringing healing to broken places and broken people? And so I don't think it's just hubris. Like I think it's real, because I do think we need to guard our hearts against it. And I think that, we can do that in some specific ways. But yeah, I think it is very real for that. And maybe there's a bell curve of like my naive youth to my cynic, older self. And maybe there's a bell curve somewhere that I'm like, I think I'm naive and I can handle it all. I have all the answers. When I was, 24 and, just starting as a pastor, I worked with the biggest dummy I've ever met. Right. And it turns out I was the biggest dummy and he was just a pastor to these people. Right. And I was so arrogant of what I thought I knew. And now my concern is like, I have my own blind spots in my life, and they're blind spots because I don't see them. If I saw them, I'd change them. They're not blind spots. Right. But it takes people in my life, like in the car riding with me, to be able to see those blind spots and call them out. And I have to have people that I trust or around me for that. And so I think this idea of like, when I'm going to pastor, man, I'm constantly looking for the hurting, the lost, and broken. And I think we know that it's ingrained in us. We've been doing it long enough. I know that. Like I want to teach and preach the word at all times. I want to reach out to people. But then it comes like, oh, what if somebody's not going to like that? And I don't want to cause somebody to sin or stumble or anything like that. But I also can't just pretend that I'm not me too. Right. Like everybody else in my church gets to vent online, but I don't. Oh, I can't believe you said that, Pastor. I can't believe, and obviously I'm going to guard. I don't tend to air that dirty laundry online anyways, but Mike, you and I know each other on a very, personal level. Like you've seen me. I try to be the same person as I am on stage, as I am in my backyard, but yeah, maybe there's a difference of what I'm going to share. And so we have to have discretion and that idea of learning what to share and with whom. I had a girl that was working for me, and she was a recovering addict, and she was in the drive-thru taking orders, and then she'd start sharing her story on how she like came out of drug addiction. And I'm like, you got to get it rolling. She's like, well, I'm just trying to be me. I've spent so much of my life lying, and now I'm just being honest all the time. And I'm like, yeah, but part of recovery is learning discretion, and it's learning who to share what with. And so as pastors, like our job is to actually learn discretion on who to share what with and when. And this is one of those things of the abbot who's in charge of monasteries. That was like one of the number one things the leader of a monastery was said to have had as a characteristic trait was discretion.
Well, and I think some of it is that we have, as a society, owned this belief that everything needs to be transparent. Like if you keep anything back from anyone, you're doing it wrong. And while for a long time that was the world around us, that has filtered into the church in big ways. And I think to the detriment of that developed skill set of pastor, you got to know who you can say that to. You got to know when and where to say that, and when and where not to. Yeah. But that's perceived by others as, lack of transparency. And so that then fuels, what you're talking about earlier of that cynicism that wells up within us if we're not careful of, okay, but are they going to see this way? Well,
yeah,
it is what it is.
Yeah. And we've probably all been burned by somebody we thought we could trust.
Sure.
And then we share something, and then all of a sudden, it ends up as a prayer request. You're like, wait, whoa, what?
It's not gossip; it's a prayer request.
Yeah, right. And I also, I guess, as a pastor, don't want to lead people to believe in this state of perfection this side of eternity, and that the last time I sinned was before I became a Christian. Right. And now that I'm a Christian, I don't sin anymore. No, I absolutely struggle. So from stage, like my sharing is very, I call it like vague but specific, right? Like, it's like, man, I fell short this week, maybe you're mentioning something through a litany of prayer, but it's a shared human experience that we're all kind of sharing. I'm sharing of, man, maybe you're suffering and struggling with greed and lust and jealousy this past week. Maybe depression set in, maybe anxiety. I mean, I've shared from stage, like I had a panic attack this past week, but I can do that in my church, in my setting.
Right.
But I've worked at churches where whoa, we're not sharing that. So, your listeners, they may, again, you're going to hear this and your cynicism may kick up right now. And I just want to encourage those listening, like, keep striving towards that. You model that authenticity, but it's okay to be guarded. It's okay to not just lay it all out there on your first meeting.
Yeah, to exercise that discretion. And I hear what you're saying. And, and the reason I'm asking about like where this stuff is, where it drives from is because I think so many, at least for me for the number of years I spent in pastoring, that cynicism is really hard to avoid. And so, you don't want to think it's coming from a place of arrogance or hubris, but to your point, I mean, I rode that bell curve too, in my younger days of ministry. And I don't know, Greg, if you ever felt this way too, but my younger days of ministry, it's like, well, I have the answers to all of our problems here as a church. If you idiots would just listen to me, then we would double in size. And I just read a Nelson Searcy book. Like, come on, I'm obviously qualified. And so, that arrogance does ride the bell curve. But I think, while there is some hubris that we have to fight against, I think there's also, kind of what I'm hearing from you is you're like, we're able to identify how many other pastors recognize this and struggle with it. Then we understand that there are systemic problems within like modern Christendom where these patterns are repeated. I used to use the phrase when I was serving in a particular tradition of churches where, like, no matter where I was serving at, I felt like some of these same problems, same statements, same mindsets existed. And I used to say all the time, like, did all these guys go to a secret church camp together where they were taught these like dumb rituals or traditions, and now they're just ingrained? Like, how did this happen? Why is this so cultural across the board? And I think we recognize some of those systemic things. And I think the only way to break those patterns, to break those cycles, is to know, okay, if I'm pastoring and I want to avoid sin, obviously, I want to avoid being cynical. Please, I want to avoid isolation because that just creates inner turmoil even more. Then how do I then make the decision so I'm not a part of the problem? Mm-hmm. How do I go about saying, okay, I need to be pastored, and what do I do? Does that make sense? So just to bring extreme clarity, if we got a guy listening right now who is like, yeah, man, that's me, dude. Like, I've been wrestling a couple sins and I feel like I can't talk to anybody about it. And it doesn't matter if I talk about it anyway, because they're just going to judge me. I might lose my job because who can you even trust here? And so, I just keep to myself. So like all three of those things, right? Like sin and cynicism and isolation. So how does he then go about being pastored? What's that look like? What does he do?
Yeah. And I think, man, I hesitate to give general, like, here's what you do. So I'll walk you through what I've done in my own life.
That's great. Yeah.
And so for me, that looked like finding help outside of the church in the form of a therapist. Okay. And so I ended up getting referred to one by another local pastor. I said, hey, do you know anybody? And I didn't share too much. I was like, do you know anybody that, he's like, man, we've referred people to this guy. And I ended up in a multi-year journey with this guy. Now I will say he did tell me at once, I don't know what's wrong with you, and then promptly retired. But
you broke him.
You broke him. No, it was good. It was good. But he said that one point, like, I don't know what's wrong with you. And I never let him live that down. He's like, that's not what I meant. I'm like, I know, but you said it. Like,
Greg's going to be using that phrase with me every week now for like, I don't know what's wrong with you.
And I retire. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Hanging up the headset, man. I'm done.
So I think you need to go, for me, as a route of the therapist. And obviously there's a confidentiality in that you have a professional role, and you're going to say, I can't afford this. Like, maybe you're bivocational right now and you don't have health insurance. You're just trying to, I'm telling you, for the longevity of your ministry, figure it out.
Yeah.
You have to figure this out. Self-care, it's one of the most important things. I mean, it's the planes going down and the oxygen masks drop, and they say, put it on yourself before you put it on your kid.
Right.
Why? Because you're going to pass out. And if you keep trying to take care of your church and you haven't done any kind of self-care, you're going to burn out, and you're going to take some people with you.
Come on.
And so self-care is okay. It's not a dirty word. So let's practice some self-care. What does that look like for you? And that looks like, I'm going to take on some spiritual disciplines, and spiritual disciplines are anything that puts on virtue or takes off our vice, right? So anything that we're putting on that brings us closer to Jesus, or anything we take out of our life that brings us closer to Jesus, now becomes a spiritual discipline. So my very act of going to therapy now can become a spiritual discipline. All right. So like that, I think that's the first step of finding a good one. And therapy is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And you're going to be like, hey, I signed up for, 4 sessions and it didn't help. Okay. So start assessing, like, did I not connect with that therapist? Did it not click? Did it, are we not jiving on a worldview, whatever it is? And it may just take some time.
Sure.
And that's okay. I've seen just too many people quit too soon on that. So that's kind of direction one. The second, thing I think you need to add to that, if you're kind of adding things to your backpack you're going to take with you, is some sort of spiritual direction. And spiritual direction is a little different than therapy, in that it is all about somebody with you, guiding you through scripture, praying with you, and helping you hear the voice of the Holy Spirit in your life. Where is God moving? What's he doing? And usually we tend to think about, you might have some relationships that are like that, but man, this is very intentional time of an ancient, spiritual discipline of that spiritual direction and walking us through that. So to me, like, those are the 2 things that have probably in my life saved my ministry, and really helped me. And if you're like, man, I don't know where to go spiritual direction. I spent many years not having any kind of mentor and needing a mentor in ministry. Call your local seminary and see if they offer any kind of thing like that. I know Biola out of Talbot, they have an Institute of Spiritual Formation. They offer spiritual direction at a cost, but they do offer that, and I pay for mine. And I meet once a month with her, and walks through that. But she was one of my spiritual direction, or spiritual Institute of Spiritual Formation cohort leaders. So I've known her now for 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
And she's, it's great. So we just meet over Zoom. And it's been really good.
Wow. So Greg, how do you process all this? Like, thinking about your context, you're in the trench in a very different role, in a different context. How do you process all this today?
So I think that, Robby, you're absolutely right that we've got to get over the ideas of getting outside help is bad. Especially from the pastor's perspective. Now, I do think the thing that is different about the place that I serve and the seat that I sit in from many of our listeners is that I'm part of a pastor team. And so I have some of those guys built in.
It's good.
Where we together are trying to not only shepherd the hearts of our people, but shepherd the hearts of each other. And so, and I get, even for folks that sit on, a team of pastors, that they may not feel that way. But I think, when that's available to us, we absolutely must take, advantage of that and build into those relationships opportunities to, develop that within our team. For those who are a part of a team, and still have to use some of that discretion and figure out, okay, is this something that I can share with this group? Is it not? And let that develop. And over time, it becomes more and more known to you what to share, when to share, how to share, all those kind of things. But then, trying to say, who is it that is helping me assess? Who is that person? Is it somebody who has been further on that journey in the specific thing that I'm walking through? And so who is walking with us through that? And I think that is one of the things that has become so foreign to us in this idea in Western church of I'm in competition with every church near me.
Oh yeah, gosh.
And so I can't go get to know that pastor across town because we're in competition. Okay, first, are we?
No. Yeah.
And second, okay, but we're still following Jesus, and if we can encourage one another and push each other toward looking more like Jesus and be that pastor to one another, why wouldn't we?
Man, that's good, dude. The only place competition belongs in the church is on the softball field, as far as I'm concerned. Beyond that, we're on the same team here, man.
Hey,
I love this.
But you've heard that song, right?
Yes, I have. Yeah,
by Haywood.
A church league softball fist fight.
Yep,
getting washed in the blood on a Tuesday night. Yeah, it's a great song. I don't know if you've heard that, Robbie, but it's a listen. Oh, dude, yeah,
that and Big Butter Jesus.
Big Butter Jesus.
Yeah, I don't listen to music, so no, I'm just kidding.
That's one of the vices he put off.
Yes.
Music. Yeah, the devil's playground. His music. Yeah. I think so much of this is extremely helpful, and we don't want to belabor this too much, but I really hope that as folks are listening to this today, that they can take an honest assessment as to where they're at and recognize, first and foremost, you're not alone. We can't say that enough. You're not alone. There are so many people just like you, so many other pastors and leaders and volunteers that are wrestling the same things that you are. And you're in good company to realize and be honest enough to say, I'm wrestling with some sin. I'm wrestling with some cynicism. I'm feeling isolated. I feel like no one understands. I don't feel like I have anyone I can talk to. And I hope that call toward spiritual disciplines of taking on virtue and taking off, these vices is liberating in this moment. Like, that'll be my prayer for this episode, is that as folks are listening, they're going, oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. There's freedom here. There's freedom to be found. And I think to kind of put a bow on this, everything that has been suggested here today, these are not solutions that you're going to stumble into. They're just not. They're not solutions you're going to fall, back ways into. These are solutions that are oftentimes a lot like community and relationships. You have to build. You're going to have to build it, and you have to be intentional and take the time. And so, man, look for those resources, look for those opportunities, take a risk on a relationship, and trust that the Lord could really use it. And so that'll be my hope with this. I love so much, Robbie, what you had to share today. And I know there's so much more I want to talk to you about. And so I'd love to just go ahead and get a firm commitment from you right now that you're going to come back on the show so we can talk more. Sure. That was a firm, very firm.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Cause I think there's so much to talk about in that, where, what do you do when God feels like he's silent, and where do you go in that? What is God doing when he feels silent for that? Cause I think I would just encourage your listeners, what you're going through, from sin to cynicism to isolation, is completely normal for a maturing Christian. And often we feel like, I messed up. I did something wrong. Like obviously it said, get into the word, get in your Bible. Do not try to pastor people without that oxygen mask attached to you. Develop a prayer life to confront that cynicism. Find a therapist, find a spiritual director, find community to confront that isolation, and don't give up on that. So
that's huge. I can't wait to have you back on the show, man, to talk more about this, because I really think you just have a tremendous perspective to offer. And so, man, I'm thankful for you. You guys got big Easter plans. Are you ready to go?
We will be. Yeah. When's Easter again? No.
Yeah, it's coming up.
No. Even that, I put together a massive like checklist of everything I need to get done, and then promptly had an anxiety attack over it. Like, oh, cool. And then, started like knocking some things out. And my wife's like, maybe you didn't need to have that anxiety attack. I'm like, that was not connected to logic. Like, I wasn't like logically like, I have a month to get everything done and I'll be fine. Like, it was just the overwhelming weight of it. So it happens, and you start chipping away at it. And Greg, like you said, you're trusting your team to get stuff done and knowing like you're not alone. But if you are alone, man, just take off, bite off less so you can chew more. If that even makes sense. You don't have to compete with the big mega churches in your town. You have to love the people that God is bringing to you. And so, do what only you can do.
Man, that's a beautiful, beautiful word. Greg, folks are listening to the show. They want to know how to connect. How do folks do that? Where do they go? What do they look for? How do they get a hold of us?
Well, you can find us anywhere that you listen to podcasts, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can find it on our Facebook page, Simplify Church, or you can go to our website, simplifychurch.com/podcast. But you can find us in any of those places, and we would love to connect with you. You can subscribe. You can leave us a review that puts us out in front of more listeners, especially on Apple Podcast. But also, if you ever want to reach out to us directly, you can do that at podcast@simplifychurch.com, and we would love to be able to begin a conversation with you. And so any way that you want to reach out to us, we would love to begin that conversation.
And come on, bring back that flannel graph hashtag, man. Let's use it. Let's use it, baby.
Hashtag flannel graph for Easter.
Yeah. I think the one we were using was hashtag flannel graph Easter 23. So it's still alive and well. We'd love to see what you got to say, what you got to show. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening. Robby, Greg, so great to see you, brothers. Thanks for spending some time with us. And man, pray you guys have a great week.
Absolutely.
Same to you.